Salams and good evening. Welcome to a long-awaited event that had to be postponed earlier in the year. Thank you, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Diana Sayed, a woman from the Afghan diaspora living here as a settler on stolen lands. I'm also an advocate, lawyer and campaigner. I would like to start this evening's events by first acknowledging the true custodians of the land in which we are gathered on here tonight at the Wheeler Centre here in Naarm, and any First Nations communities joining us. I am honoured to be chairing this panel on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to recognise that sovereignty has never been ceded and pay my respects to all elders past and present. I would also like to acknowledge any people from Afghanistan who may be in the audience here tonight. These topics are still incredibly close to home and triggering for us as we relive our intergenerational and collective trauma. And this isn't just from August 15, 2021, but from the last 40 years of conflict, crisis and ongoing catastrophe. So we also just saw that we marked 21 years since 9/11 over the weekend, for which for many of us is still so raw, as we were used as political pawns for the years that ensued and what we have termed the war of terror. So I just did a quick acknowledgement there, and we've got a bit of proceedings for the night. We'll have a video shown, and then there'll be a Q&A and a conversation had and a bit of a discussion. And then if we've got some time, we'll open up to the audience for some questions and answers. So please think about some questions you'd like to open or ask the panellists tonight, and then we would invite you to stay for some music at the end, because we are here to discuss art, Afghanistan, war, and whatever that conjures up tonight. So I will also just throw over to Anthony Lowenstein. He is a independent journalist and filmmaker, and he was part of their 20 years project. He's co-curated with Tia Cass. It was a journalistic and artistic initiative with Afghans here in so-called Australia and around the world to assess the legacy of the US-led war in Afghanistan. They commissioned young female Afghan-Australian artists to make a short film on these themes. So Anthony, did you want to come up, or do we want to throw to the film? Yep, okay.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. Yet we go forward to defend freedom.
The first strike against terrorism as a missile barrage lands on Afghanistan.
Peace and freedom will prevail. May God continue to bless America.
Explosions over Kabul, over Kandahar, over Jalalabad. 25 strike aircraft, 15 bombers including B-2 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from warships.
America has no better friends than Australia. That was an attack on Australia as much as it was an attack on the United States.
And all the indications are it's just the beginning.
Do you have any sort of time frame for the deployment of these assets?
No, I don't. War against terrorism, which is much our war and our fight and our struggle as it is for the people of the United States. National security is therefore about proper response to terrorism. It's also about having a far-sighted, strong, well-thought-out defence policy.
An ideology based upon liberty, which stands in stark contrast to the ideology of the thugs and murderers called the Taliban.
Terrorism.
Terrorist.
Terrorism.
Terrorist.
Terrorism.
Terrorist. Terrorist. Terrorist.
3, 2, 1.
The UN assistance mission in Afghanistan says almost 3,700 civilians were killed. The number of child casualties increased by 40%.
To say that these attacks are in any way against Afghanistan or the Afghan people is flat wrong.
But we must exercise restraint in the use of military force and always consider the long-term consequences of our actions.
Today, the Australian Defence Force
is rightly held to account for allegations of grave misconduct on operations in Afghanistan. None of the alleged unlawful killings were described as being in the heat of battle. None were alleged to have occurred in circumstances in which the intent of the perpetrator was unclear, confused, or mistaken.
I think we should look forward to a good outcome because the people of Afghanistan deserve a good outcome.
We went there for the right reason.
Yes, it has been worth it. It is a war we have to win, and it's a war we will win.
Freedom's always worth it.
The Morrison government's conscious decision to leave hundreds of our former Afghan civilian interpreters, other loyal allies and their family members behind to be slaughtered by the Taliban now renders this medal a badge of shame.
Afghanistan is a total and complete disaster. What are we doing?
Taliban wants to make a deal. We just signed an agreement.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
It is not. It is not inevitable.
The Taliban advance appears unstoppable. Regional capitals are falling like dominoes.
The Taliban has seized control of Kunduz.
Today it was Ghazni.
The UN says this is likely to be the deadliest 12 months yet.
The Taliban are now in control of Afghanistan.
And the commercial flights are currently not running.
Mr. Raj, your despair is entirely understandable. And what do you want to say to those world leaders right now?
To those world leaders, I'm going to say really shame on you. I'm going to say to the whole world, shame on you for what you did to Afghanistan. What is happening in Afghanistan today is going to put this country 200 years back. Again.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, wonderful. Look, my name is Anthony Lowenstein, and I wanted to start off by acknowledging traditional owners of the land on which we are here tonight and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. You know, one of the ideas behind the war in Afghanistan, we were told from the beginning, and I'm talking about the war post 9/11, was it was to free Afghan women, bring liberty and eradicate terrorism. And if you look 20 years on, more than 20 years, 21 years on now, it's quite clear that none of those aims, stated aims, have actually come true. And it's really important for us to ask why that is. And I wanted to briefly explain what the project that I was involved with for the last 3 years was about and why the war in Afghanistan, which so rarely, in fact, today gets much coverage anymore. We hear a lot about the war in Ukraine, and the war in Ukraine is horrific and deserves coverage. But there's another war that's never really ended in Afghanistan, and that is a war that we are directly complicit in as Australians, and yet we don't hear enough about it. About 3.5 years ago, a number of colleagues of mine, I'm a journalist based in Sydney, and a number of artists both in Australia and overseas, Afghans and Australians, decided to start a project called 20 Years, which was talking about the legacy of the Afghan war. And although you could argue very correctly that the war in fact has been going on for 40 years, we were focusing on particularly the war since 9/11. And the aim was to look at what is the legacy of the war, what was the aim of the war, and what was the end result. Now, back then in 2019, when we first conceived it, we had no idea, of course, how the war was going to progress. Was it going to be a Taliban takeover? We had no idea, although some of us feared that might be the outcome. And in the last year or so, we've had a number of public events. There's been an exhibition of Afghan artists and local artists in Sydney. There's been various public events, such as here tonight. And the aim has always been central, is to centre Afghan voices who too often are ignored, forgotten, demonised or silenced, and to say that Afghans who are not homogenous, they have a range of views. Some supported the war, some opposed the war, some support the Taliban, some oppose them. Those voices are not often being heard. And to me, as a journalist who spent time in Afghanistan as a journalist in the last decade, I was always astounded at the complete disconnect between what we were seeing and hearing about the war in Afghanistan in the media and the actual reality on the ground, which was very far removed from each other. And a key theme for me in a lot of my work over the years, whether it's about Afghanistan or Palestine or a range of other places, is what is our own complicity? What is our own responsibility? And when I say our own, I mean as an Australian, as a Westerner, as someone who has deep, not personal complicity. I'm not a soldier. I wasn't killing any civilians in Afghanistan. But we as Australians have deep complicity. And this is a bipartisan issue. It doesn't really matter in the last 20 years whether it was Labor or Liberal. It made no difference who was in power. In fact, it made no difference really who was in power in Washington, Democrat or Republican. It made no difference. And just as an aside, the work that you're seeing as I'm speaking is by Tia Cass, one of my colleagues on this project. He's a Melbourne-based artist. He couldn't be with us tonight. He's in Greece. But he did a number of amazing portraits of people who had a connection to the Afghan war in some way. Now, these 4 people, just briefly, this is Nouri Asala, who's a Melbourne-based Afghan who came here many, many years ago, who does wonderful work to help Afghans back in Afghanistan and here. That's David McBride, who is an Australian whistleblower who was serving as a military lawyer in Afghanistan, saw evidence of Australian war crimes, tried to report that up the chain of command, got nowhere, and leaked that information to the ABC, which became the Afghan Files, which came out about 5 years ago. He's being prosecuted as we speak by the Australian government for leaking classified information. Now, he doesn't deny doing that, he admits it, but he says that, isn't it remarkable how not one Australian soldier, despite the Brereton report, which came out a few years ago, detailing 39 civilians killed by Australia, and my understanding is there are far, far more. Not one Australian soldier has faced a war crimes trial, and yet the man who exposed it actually is the person who is now on trial, who could face the rest of his life in prison for doing so. Another individual here is a friend of mine in Kabul who came here 20 years ago around the time of the Tampa and was attempting to try to be here because he was fleeing the Taliban regime. He was then forcibly sent back to Afghanistan. He spent the last 20 years in unbelievably tough situation. He's again now claiming asylum here in Australia. Another artist is a female Afghan graffiti artist who was tragically killed in a suicide attack about 1.5 years ago in Kabul, who did amazing work with this group called Art Lords that used to do, before the Taliban takeover last year, remarkable work around Kabul. Many of you will know Afghanistan, but there's often huge amounts of so-called blast walls, these massive concrete barriers that the Western powers put up to protect themselves, and so they thought, from insurgents and suicide bombers. And these sort of made the city incredibly stark and grey, and these Afghan artists decided to paint them. And she was one of those artists that did so. And as I said at the beginning, what exactly was the war in Afghanistan apparently for? We were told it was for revenge, for justice, for women's rights, for nation building, and wasn't maybe for enriching defence contractors who made, I might add, a huge win on the war. And from their perspective, the war was an unbelievable success, a huge success. Today, Afghanistan, as everyone here knows, is ruled by the Taliban. Minorities and women are silenced or repressed. They're unable to move freely. Much of the world yet stands idly by. And this really, to me, is the heart of what 20 Years Project is about and what this issue should be about. The West committed the most unbelievable, heinous crimes of aggression and war crimes in that country for 20 years. We don't even know the number of civilians, Afghans, who were killed. 50,000, 70,000, 100,000. No one actually really knows the figure. Why? Because no one was actually really counting. What does that say to you about how we in the West viewed the war in Afghanistan? What does that say to you about the kind of way that we viewed the Afghan people who we were told we were liberating? And as a journalist and filmmaker, as someone who comes from a Jewish background myself, who feels often deeply aggrieved by the way my so-called Jewish compatriots behave towards Palestinians in Palestine, I believe we have a responsibility as Australians and as human beings to actually ask the serious questions about why we went to war in the first place. And it's quite clear what should happen. War crimes should be punished, lying governments should be thrown out, and journalists who supported the war, and it's amazing to see how many journalists and reporters and media figures spent roughly 19 years of the 20-year occupation, supporting the Afghan government, which was deeply corrupt, supporting the war, largely ignoring war crimes, then being radically shocked in August last year when the Taliban took over. When any journalist who spent time outside the Kabul bubble would tell you it was only a matter of time. Let me finish on this. This issue has a tendency to be very grim. The war in Afghanistan was brutal. The Taliban now rule the country. But one of the things that we wanted to also do with this project, and this will feature tonight, not entirely, but partly, is celebrating Afghan culture, Afghan music, Afghan voices, and Afghans themselves, both here in Australia, in the diaspora, and in Afghanistan itself. Afghanistan is not just about war, it's not just about conflict and violence, it's also about an amazing, long, historical culture that not just deserves respect, but also a great deal of admiration. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Anthony. Really appreciate all that you've done as a non-Afghan to highlight, centre and amplify the voices of those people from Afghanistan, particularly, our voices in the diaspora as well, because as we know how Western media plays out, our voices are often silenced, whether it's deliberate or not. But it's really important that we are the children of those first waves of migrants and refugees who fled in the late 80s. And we've seen the different waves of migration over the years, through the 90s, under the first sort of iteration of the Taliban. And then on the panel here tonight, you've got people who were only recently evacuated last year during the Kabul crisis. And you'll see again how the media frames these issues as well. We don't talk about the fall of Kabul. No country, no state, no capital just falls. It was a very deliberate handing over, selling out, however you want to talk about it, but a country and a state doesn't just fall. So we've got a bit to cover, and we're really excited to have that conversation and to talk about whatever, another Afghanistan actually looks like. And, it's obviously framed the backdrop of art, but war as well, and the many layers that exist in our culture, our history, and obviously 9/11 happening over the weekend was quite... I think it's quite auspicious as well that this event had to be postponed around that anniversary. But I'd also just like to start this conversation by saying, as a Muslim woman myself and settler living here on stolen lands, as a former refugee who was also forcibly displaced from my ancestral homes, I want to say that it's still an immense privilege to be able to speak before you all this evening and continue to speak truth to power. I have been working as a human rights lawyer for over 15 years, and we all stand on the shoulders of all of our strong Afghan lineage, of those of the blood that runs deeply in ours, and the history of our staunch resilience and survival in the face of so much adversity, and we pay homage to them every day. We sit here as a panel of those in the diaspora from Afghanistan with feelings of incredible heartbreak and heaviness. We talk about the allegations of war crimes and the Australian Defence Force. It's been over 2 years now since the Brereton inquiry and those damning allegations of what we know, right? And Anthony already prefaced, what is it that we don't know? When we talk about misinformation campaigns, we talk about disinformation campaigns, I actually talk about missing information campaigns. If anyone's been following the Brereton inquiry and those reports, there's not one prosecution has been referred to the criminal courts, yet someone like Ben Roberts-Smith has a defamation case which has been highly in the media, and that's the only way that we can actually try and grapple with the truth, whatever that means. And yet he gets to sit front and centre in this settler colony mourning, as I call her, Queen Lizzie. So, the last year again has brought the spotlight back on our struggle in the most traumatic and tragic of ways with the re-emergence of the Taliban in August 2021. What has been more shattering for us has been the global indifference since. everything that was lost and continues to be lost every day, we don't act. The daily attack on women's dignity and denial of humanity at the hands of the Taliban beggars belief and is quite literally leading to an emboldened state of misogyny and that who some have deemed as gender apartheid. However, solidarity can be a source of hope and a great source of strength, and people coming out here tonight really is important for us that people show up and don't forget. And, you know, Anthony talked about Ukraine. From Kabul to Kiev, our struggles against imperialism, interventionists, that is, our struggle remains the same. And those of us in the diaspora know that solidarity matters and that the world has not forgotten them or us. Our voices and continued support matters to all those people in Afghanistan, and we are paying tribute to them tonight and everyone with hope in our hearts for a better future. So we're the communities in the diaspora here, and we're going to be reflecting on the relationship between resistance and reimagination. We've learnt that reimagining our worlds after crisis and violence that takes place is essentially a creative act. We live as people of faith and spirituality that unless we can truly envision the future that we want, we can never take steps in achieving it. That's why art and reimagining a world and creativity play such a huge part, and it's really incredible to see all those intersections tonight. And we know that art has always been a form of resistance, whether it's the art lords beaming their projects on the streets of Kabul or here in Melbourne. Whether it's poetry, spoken word, we just had the Melbourne Writers' Festival here on the weekend. It always evokes a rare emotional journey into the realms of what we want our reality to be, what we dare to speak into being as a displaced people from Afghanistan. We have a rich and long history of poetry as a form of prose when we speak. I often dream in Dari and English because I often say how limiting English is to that imagination and how I'm truly able to express the depths and true nature of the feelings. We talk about our experiences in the diaspora. We talk about how we're Afghan, we're Australian. What does that mean to us? Are we Afghan-Australian? And at the Melbourne Writers' Festival on the weekend, there was an incredible book being platformed by a Hazara refugee who was on the Tampa, who then was resettled in New Zealand by a man by the name of Abbas Nazari. And he talks about being Afghan-Australian, Afghan-New Zealander, Afghan-American, whatever it is. And that hyphen in our name can be a bridge to whatever you want that identity to be. So I think it's important, for us here in Australia, so-called Australia as Afghans, our oscillating identities, and we know that our citizenship in this settler colonial project doesn't mean we have to continue to be complacent in the continuum of violence that is perpetrated in our name overseas, or that it's conditional on our silence either. We'll talk about sport as well. It's always been a form of resistance too, an area that has multiple touch points with human rights and movements for change, where we've often used the global stage to disrupt discourses and put spotlight on serious abuses. And we know that transformational change takes many hands, many hearts and ways of working and knowing. Not all of us will find our home in public demonstrations or celebrations on international days commemorating injustice, but we'll be working for the cessation of violence against our people in Afghanistan and peoples all around the world nonetheless. From Tigray to Yemen, Somalia, Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, our liberation is all intertwined and our calls must be heeded. So the panel, and I will get to them, I promise, also asks the question about another Afghanistan. And it is imperative in this question to evoke these historical and political contexts to how our lives could have been different, in fact, if we had never left our countries of origin, and how we continue to live our history in the lineages we carry with us every day. Or if this question conjures a different perspective to what audiences may have had about what and who we are as Afghans, and from all that you see in the media, as Anthony mentioned. There's lots to unpack. But I will turn to our esteemed panellists now. We may have to cut the Q&A short and re-show the video. Please stick around, there'll be music as well. But I will turn to our panellists. That's what you've all come to hear, not from me. So to my far left, we have Barat Ali Batoor. He's a multi-award-winning Hazara photographer and filmmaker. Batoor started photography in 2002, and his photographs are haunting and evoke depths of emotion that are true testimony of his talent. He has been exhibited all around the world. He's been published in the Washington Post, Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, plenty of others. He's also been the recipient of New York Open Society's photography grant before his project, The Dancing Boys of Afghanistan. He's also won 2 Walkley Awards, one for the photo that he did in 2013, and he's also been touring a documentary at the moment, Batoor, A Refugee Journey. If you've been noticing it, it's been touring all over the country. It's an incredible documentary. I just recommend everyone to take their tissues with them. We're so lucky that he's back in Naam with us here tonight. And then to my immediate left, there's Fatima Yousufi. Fatima is a 20-year-old athlete who's been playing soccer for Afghanistan's women's national team since 2017. Fatima has also been on the women's youth and grassroots panel at the Afghanistan Football Federation since 2020. Moreover, she's been an English language instructor of one of the organisations. She was a senior student in business management at one of the most prestigious universities in Afghanistan, and she's an academic as well. She didn't actually include this in her bio, just for the record. Humility is not just a trait that's celebrated here in Australia with tall poppy syndrome. Afghans also have a proverb that it's your tree, when you flower and you have fruits with the tree, that hangs quite low. So the more fruit and more flowers you have on the tree, the head naturally hangs low to the ground. And that's how we describe humility. Fatima was actually on the cover of New York Times magazine, the New York Times last week, for her advocacy and the work that she's done in highlighting the cause of Afghan women since she was evacuated from Kabul to Australia last year. She didn't mention that in her bio, but I am. So I will start with Fatima. So you were part of the national football team in Afghanistan, a true and huge passion of yours from such a young age. Can you tell us more about the time that you've spent pursuing this?
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, my sound is good. So yeah, it's a beautiful journey for me, like to be an athlete, to be a Hazara woman, and living in Afghanistan with different situation, and to have that dreams that you wanted to be a professional player. But it is, at the same time, it's hard to understand the society, the situation that is in your country, struggling with all the problems and trying to be the best version of yourself, to be an ideal for other girls, and to be more powerful, to fight with the problems in your society, in your country. So that was apart from that hard times, beside all those things, football was a dream, a passion, not just for me, like for all my teammates, and we were enjoying that environment. That was the thing that we were thinking, that we are powerful, and we believed in our power, that as a girl, that we can do the best things in our lives, and we can be role models for other girls. So absolutely, it was a different situation for me. Like, I wasn't thinking one day I will make it to the national team from 2017. It's not just like maybe about the peoples. Even I'm talking about my family. It was hard to deal with those problems, to struggle with the problems of the family issues, as they wasn't comfortable enough to let me to go for being an athlete as a soccer player. It was such a big deal for my dad, for my brother to accept it. But the thing is always, I have this thing in my mind that you should have that hope. Whatever you're thinking is impossible, but if you have hope, so it's impossible. It is possible. I had that hope that I will make it, but it will be impossible if you don't have that support. Absolutely, there was my mountain, my mother, my biggest supporter, and always wanted to go for my dreams, to chase my dreams, and to be the one, to be that version that I always wanted to be. The painful sentence that my mom said to me, and I'm always remembering that, is she was telling me one day when I was part of the national team on that times, and she said, I really don't want you to become me, to be me. I didn't really understand at the first place on that time, but then I realized, yeah, she couldn't have those dreams. She couldn't have her rights to go for education, or maybe other things. Like, everybody have dreams, so absolutely my mom said, I don't want you to become me. I really wanted to explain it, and I did it on that day, so I said, why not? I want to be like you, as powerful as you, to not stop on things and not giving up this much easy. So I will make it happen. Because of those promises, I made it. I'm really happy that I made it to the national team. I made it to the, I went to other countries. I had several trips with the national teams, my biggest achievements, and I went for my education. The best thing that every girl back in Afghanistan or any other places in the world, they wanted to have that right. Those are the basic rights that they wanted to. Unfortunately, when right now they're in Afghanistan, they don't have both of that. Not their dreams, and also not the education that's the important one for them. One day they will be, as a mother, they will be the teacher for their children. So it is necessary, at least, education. But unfortunately, in my country, Afghanistan, it is not a good thing for a woman to have their education, and they don't have this right to go for their dreams and to have big dreams. And I'm really upset about last year. Like, it is impossible. Like, I was thinking it was, in my mind, it was impossible. Till the end, I was trying to tell my friends, teammates, everybody, like, it is impossible. A country like Afghanistan will be on that situation. Absolutely, as Diana said, another Afghanistan. It was out of my imagination to imagine Afghanistan will be like that. Because as a young person, I was having those imagination because I struggled so much to achieve my dreams, achieve my goals, and to be that version that I really wanted to be. So they really took those dreams, not just from me, like from so many girls and so many people. Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot there. And obviously, when we talk about the current situation, it's still really incredibly raw for us, and it brings up a lot of that trauma. And, you know, it doesn't matter whether you've been here a year, 10 years, 20 years, you never stop. It lives on with us and those memories that are brought up. So thank you, Fatima, for sharing. And, you know, just to be really clear to audiences as well, and those who might not know, Afghanistan doesn't have a history of denying women their education. It's a fundamental right. My grandmothers were all educated, and it's not grounded in the religion either. We're actually the only country in the world that denies women the right to education. And that's when we think about Another Afghanistan. That's not the Afghanistan that Fatima grew up in. That's not the Afghanistan my mother grew up in, or my grandmother's. And when we think about the images that the Western media continues to peddle of women in these blue burqas, that erases us, it dehumanises us, and it completely makes us feel like we live in the shadows. We are not those women. We are not reduced to that. If you actually have been following the media closely, you'll see that women have been out protesting every day. They're out there on the streets. With that amount of fear does not stop them, because education is also a fundamental value of Afghan society. So always having to reframe those narratives. As you can see, 2 Afghan women here on the panel tonight. That should be enough to reframe that for you. But Batoor, over to you. You've done some, again, reframing. You've done some incredible work capturing the multifaceted rawness and reality of so many people from Afghanistan, from the Dancing Boys photography series to documenting the very real targeted killings of the Hazara people in Pakistan. Can you tell us about what has inspired your work and how you see that art connecting us to Afghanistan?
Thank you very much, Diana. And so I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on. And I pay my respect to their elders past and present and emerging. I think art, as a child, I have been always probably an artist from inside. I never wanted to kind of like in a curriculum kind of studies. I was never into that. But I always loved art, drawing, paintings and things, but never thought to be a photographer. I always wanted to become a model or actor. Wanted to be on the limelight, but never happened. So I instead went behind the camera, and it was accidental. I'm an accidental photographer. So it was September 11 when all the journalists from all around the world, including Australia, they all poured in the city where I was born and grew up as a refugee in Pakistan. So I was just learning English, and I tried my luck to get some interpreting job. From there, the money I earned, like I saw all those photographers that they had like big SLR cameras with big lenses and like traveling around, like, so that really inspired me, and I invested the money I earned into camera to do photography as as medium of my expression, for my expression, but to like as a into documentary or photojournalism, that was basically I think more connected to the history of my people and to the past. Growing up as a refugee, identity has been a great issue and topic for me, because growing up in a country where like you feel you don't belong, you're reminded every day that you do not belong here. So that was a big question for me.
Relatable, very relatable.
Yeah, and I wanted to say something, and the first time I went to Afghanistan with the Sunday Telegraph, I saw all these destructions and poverty and devastation. So I wanted to say something. I was not good at writing. I was not good at anything. Like I wanted to say. I had views. I had points to discuss. So that was photography, and I started that journey, and I went to Afghanistan in 2005 and started working on different issues. At one point, I wanted to kind of like, I was a bit tired of the wars and like the portrayal that we were seeing in media, and I wanted to a bit focus on the beautiful aspect and sides of Afghanistan as well, but that didn't last for very long because there were too many issues in Afghanistan that needed attention. And as a local, someone who understands the culture, the tradition, the background, so I wanted to tell those stories. And the Dancing Boys is one of them because that was not highlighted before. I mean, mine was the first photo story which was that I did, and it was published. Before that, we heard about those practice in words like UN organizations, human rights organizations. Everyone, they all had on the papers, but not first-hand witness of that. So what I did was like to give a face to that issue, and also art using as a medium to tell the word, tell the miseries of my people. Because war does not start for my people, at least the last 20 years, the 40 years, or 50 years. Ours has been the longest in Afghanistan. It started in 1880s when more than half of my population were brutally massacred. Like with the skulls of my people were built minarets by the king. And that has been going on since till date. It has never stopped, neither under the democracy or before that under the communist government or the kings. It has been happening. And I'm also expected to wear the hat of the oppressors. Like, I have to call myself like with their identity every day, like, and I'm being oppressed by them. So that is the history that I am fighting for. I mean, like, I want to use my art, use my skills to tell that story and of very long history. I don't know how I will that put together, but that is my struggle and like my probably kind of efforts to tell that story of which has been suppressed for a very long time. But I'm lucky, like in a country like Australia, like now I can access platforms, or at least I will be free. I won't be threatened to say what I want to say. Like in Afghanistan, it is very risky, or like living in Pakistan, a lot of things someone or people or artists or journalists are like not capable of saying because of their safety and their survival.
Yeah. And when we talk about our identities here as people from the diaspora, whether we hold those dualities of identities, you know, we are settlers here on stolen lands, and we continue to benefit from the forced dispossession of First Nations communities. And so when we talk about telling histories and truth-telling of our own histories, and, you know, the way that minorities were treated in Afghanistan as well historically, has not been told. And so I think it's really important, again, that we get the platforms to tell our own histories and to tell our own stories. And I think it's incredible the work that both Batoor and Fatima have been doing to make sure that the voices of those who are at the margins and the most historically oppressed get told, and that is the Hazara community. So it's incredible to witness that. And Batoor's documentary, again, A Refugee Journey, is touring. Please look out for it. But Fatima, I think another question for you is, you know, you talked about the work that you're doing here, and you know, the way that the football community here in Victoria has embraced the national team has been incredible, and what the work that Craig Foster has done and his advocacy, and they're playing in the league here. If you can get out to a game, I'd really encourage it. It's incredible. And they've really embraced them. But we talk about, you know, our brothers and sisters back in Afghanistan, and I'm really curious about what the future of sport looks like, you know, in that sort of environment and the cultural history that could be erased. And when we talk about the grief that we experience intergenerationally, we also talk about the grief of the futures of the women that are still left behind, that their dreams are being diminished and denied systematically. So I'm worried about, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about the future of sport now in Afghanistan for women.
As I said before, like, I never had that hope just for a while, like on that situation last year, exactly, that I thought to myself, I will not be alive. Like, I never imagined I will be here today even. It's a big change. But again, it's because of hope. I hope for future that Afghanistan will be again an Afghanistan. But it will be possible if we are all like together, raise our voices like together. It can't be possible just for one person to do that. I'm asking all not just only Afghans, human beings, to raise their voices, use their voice, and don't let them to just let their rights to go, and they don't have their rights. So right now when I'm here, I'm alive and I can have those rights, and I can play, I can go for education. So I'm using this voice anywhere in any interviews or maybe anywhere with peoples to call help for other girls who are back in Afghanistan. Not just only in Afghanistan. Whenever I'm thinking, it's in all the world, whenever you think, there will be girls who don't have their rights. So it is better to just use our voices to be helpful, at least for those girls who don't have their rights, who don't have their dreams. Right now, when I'm here, I said it's because the voices of others. So it is really important to use our voices, and I can see it's possible for Afghanistan to have back again sport, education, everything, peace. Nothing is impossible if you have hopes. Yeah. I had that hope, and I'm here today, and I'm grateful.
Beautiful. And that's the Afghanistan that we aspire to bring back. And, there's lots of things that people can do, and we'll talk a bit more about that as well, hopefully time permitting. But to you, Batoor, as well, you've been seminal in leading the campaign for change here in Australia following the Kabul crisis. Can you speak a little bit about the Action for Afghanistan campaign, and the work that you've been doing at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, and potentially where people can actually continue to amplify our voices and the pressure points that might still be possible under this new government?
So after the fall of the handover of Afghanistan, technically, because even before that, we were very conscious of what was happening or unfolding in Afghanistan. So we were constantly calling on community members here to do something for those who are left behind or who are the most vulnerable in Afghanistan, how we can help, how we can raise their voices. So this was Action for Afghanistan came on the grassroots people from the diaspora community from different places, most of them, they didn't know each other before, I think. And so we all came together and started this very unorganized, kind of movement which then got organized and got together. And then we had our allies together who supported us, like ASRC, like RACS, JRS, and HRLC and other organizations who came together, Amnesty, and they came together to support and amplify our voices, that what we actually want, because we are the ones who have the expertise, who know the ground realities, what is happening in Afghanistan. Listen to us, and we were trying to educate the government as well, to call on the government to what they need to do, what is urgent, what are at stake, and those predictions and the claims that we have made since that collapse or handover of Afghanistan, it was all became true. We were saying the girls will be denied education, and Taliban, they were portraying their soft image in the beginning that no, we have changed, but that was false. They were saying we will not harm those who have helped the allies and also who were the former government officials. False. They have targeted everyone. They are still doing that. Yesterday and last week, they have killed 2 former government officials from the Hazara community only, and they are targeting the Tajiks in Panjshir, in Andrab, and other in Badakhshan, and also they have evicted thousands of Hazaras in different provinces, and also they are evicting Uzbeks and Tajiks in the north. So this is a very big agenda of the change in the demographic of Afghanistan, how to make Afghanistan a country like those ethnic groups into completely minority. Currently, Afghanistan is a country of minorities. No one makes a majority in that country, and the effort is there to make the other ethnic groups as a minority there. So the eviction is happening. We have raised about that our concerns that ethnic groups who do not affiliate or are aligned with the views of the Taliban will be eliminated, will be targeted. Also, the religious minorities like the Sikhs. Sikhs have been kind of almost erased completely from Afghanistan. Probably the last 7 or 10 people remaining. We saw after the blast, couple of them who were left there, they also left Afghanistan. The only Jew we had left in Afghanistan also, who was living in Afghanistan, also left Afghanistan. So they were the cause, and we called on the government to ask to listen to the ask of the diaspora community, which were like 20,000 additional humanitarian visas for Afghanistan immediately in order to help in that big crisis. Only in the first 6 months of the crisis, Australia received over 30-some thousand applications, which included over 100 applicants in that. So now it is over 200 applicants, and we haven't really responded to that big crisis. And still we are calling on this government that they should move faster. The crisis is happening. It is not waiting. Human lives are being lost. And so the Taliban or ISIS, they are not waiting. Communities like Hazaras, they are facing genocide, and that is happening, and it has been reported by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International and other organizations that they are very vulnerable, and as well as the women and those former government officials, the other ethnic groups like who have been resisting to surrender to the Taliban, like Tajiks and Uzbeks, they are being targeted. So this is serious, and we have been calling. And also we have over 5,000 people from Afghanistan who are currently on temporary protection visas or no visas at all. They could be deported at any time to Afghanistan because they don't have any visas. So we have been calling that to grant them permanent protection. This government has promised during the election campaign that they will provide permanent protection, and also recently the minister has also announced again, re-emphasized that they will do it, but it is the matter of time. As soon as they can, that is better, because the longer they wait, the anxiety and the trauma among these people is increasing. They have already suffered for too long, over 10 years, and they have been separated. Many of them, they have their families in Afghanistan or like in a second country without any support. So it is very difficult for these people to cope with that separation and also anxiety of being in uncertain situation. So that was a campaign for the Action for Afghanistan. And also we had thousands of refugees living in Indonesia who have been there. Like when the Scott Morrison in 2014 was the immigration minister, he put a ban on the resettlement of refugees from Indonesia. So that ban, we asked the government to lift that ban in order for these refugees to be resettled to Australia. And also the family reunification under the last government, they were given the very least priority. And like thousands of people have been waiting who are now Australian citizens or permanent residents. They have been waiting for their families to reunite. And as a result of like that delay, many of people, their families were like in Afghanistan when Taliban took over Afghanistan, and that was a very serious situation. Some of them, their families, they have been harmed as well. So they were some of the calls that we, as a part of the Action for Afghanistan, were calling on the government, and we will keep pushing that, and until those asks are met. So yeah. That was about it.
Yeah, and an incredibly successful campaign as well, because it was Afghan-led, which, for those people who may or may not be familiar with campaigning, often the voices of those most impacted are silenced. So that was incredible to witness that, and we all came together over our shared cause for human rights, and putting pressure on the government as well was incredible. But also seeing, for us in the diaspora, Afghanistan's so fresh in our mind, and then the Ukraine sort of crisis and unfolding as well, and to see that selective compassion, and where there's the political will to act, they can make those moves. But with Afghans, Muslims, people of colour, it's always political, and it's red tape, it's delays, it's not having enough processing time, it's not committing to it. It's always a budgetary constraint, where these are actually people's lives that can contribute to a society here in so-called Australia. And so I always talk about it through the lens of racism, Islamophobia and dehumanising, which 20 years of how the media portrayed us, I wouldn't want us here either if I believed everything that the media talked about us. So I'm conscious of time, but I just want to leave quickly, if we can be quick. We're not good at that. We have lots to say. But I just want to leave the audience with what does another Afghanistan mean? So I'll start with you, Batoor, and then Fatima.
Another Afghanistan for me probably looks completely different. Another Afghanistan for me is where every group, no matter what their numbers are, either big or small, they have a representation, they have a say in that government or any power sharing or any power making. The power should not be centralized in Afghanistan, which is the key problem in Afghanistan. And that was the biggest mistake of the US when they invaded Afghanistan and then supported a government which was corrupt, centralized, and like one person was the king, like a king, who made every decision and brought Afghanistan to its knees just last year. So that should not happen, and that has been happening. That was and it should not be a criteria in Afghanistan that only certain people from certain ethnic groups can be the leader of Afghanistan. If someone has the capability, if someone has the support from the people, doesn't matter if they are very small in numbers, should be able to lead the country. And unfortunately, in the past, over 100 years, only one ethnic group had the right to lead that country, and that should not happen. And other ethnic groups should have a say in that government. If people are supportive of that, then that should be another Afghanistan. And also, Afghanistan should be an inclusive for everyone. Even the name Afghanistan is not inclusive. The term Afghan identity is not inclusive. I'm not Afghan. Like, Afghan is an ethnic group. We respect, we honor them. They should be proud of their identity, and let us be proud of our identity. So that is where like the basics of Afghanistan can start. Afghanistan can move forward. Doesn't matter. Another invasion, America, Russia, or China next time may come to Afghanistan and like bring a so-called peace, but that will not be successful if this is not tackled from the foundation. The foundation is laid wrong. Unless that is not corrected or justified, it is not going to be a peaceful country ever. And we will be seeing these disasters and flow of migrations and displacement and sufferings and killings all the time. So it has to be corrected from the bottom, from the foundation. And that is another Afghanistan for me, and I hope I will see that in my lifetime, which I doubt.
We have to have hope. We have to have hope. And for anyone familiar with the work of Dr. Amin Saikal, he's based at the ANU. He talks about Afghanistan and society being a mosaic. So many different ethnic and sectarian groups, and a lot of that makes up the beauty, but also the unruliness that is to actually contain and so-called control it. So, Fatima, briefly, if you can, what's another Afghanistan to you?
So, I'm totally agreed with the thoughts and ideas of Batoor, and that's absolutely true. And as a youngster, when I'm thinking about the word Another Afghanistan, I'm just remembering things that's in my mind, like that I was witness last year. Women's and males and females, both of them, totally different. The changes of the society, afraid faces, scream of the children, everything is just in my ears, and every time, whenever I'm thinking about Afghanistan, it is totally hard for me to imagine another Afghanistan, the Afghanistan that I knew. So it is absolutely hard to even imagine about another Afghanistan, that it was out of my imagination or all the people from Afghanistan that never imagined of that kind of situation. So it is totally hard to think even about another Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I really wanted that old Afghanistan, the simple, the people that was living in a peace and a good environment in a simple way, with agriculture and with art. Everything was simple and having their simple life. So it's another Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, that's a universal experience, right? We all want to live in safety, and we all want to have our families reunited. We all want to live with certainty and citizenship, and I think that's just a fundamental human sort of nature to want those and have those aspirations. So I do want to thank the panel and thank everyone for coming out here on a Tuesday night. We'll have some music as well from Taki Khan to take us out. And also in terms of the art, if you'd like to access more art, Red Room Poetry online did an incredible series showcasing Afghan women, and it's called Voices from a Cage. So you can go online and listen to Afghan women from Afghanistan share some of their poetry of their experiences over the last year. But thank you again for Batoor and Fatima for tonight's panel.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Taki, and I'm also from Afghanistan. So Ilham is with me, helping me with keyboard. The song which I'm singing is actually a poem from different poet from Afghanistan, and I want to dedicate all this song for all those women. They're standing and fighting for their rights in Afghanistan, and they are not allowed to go to school. Enjoy khun basufray tu non me shavad in sel gham baraye tu baran me shavad in sel gham baraye tu baran me shavad. شود کابل ز درس و مشق پشیمان نمی شود این جای خون و سفره تو نان نمی شود این سیل غم برای تو باران نمی شود این کودکی کفن شده با دفتر و کتاب این کودکی کفن شده با دفتر و کتاب این کودکی کفن شده با دفتر و کتاب آه ای جهان برای تو وجدان نمی شود آه ای جهان برای تو وجدان نمی شود این سیل غم برای تو باران نمی شود این سیل غم برای تو باران نمی شود جای خون به سفره تو نان نمی شود این سیل غم برای تو باران نمی شود این سیل غم برای تو باران نمی شود دی ملکا مسافر و غریب و ما خدا جان بی یار و بی کس و قوم و غریب و ما خدا جان شهنشاهی مد اینجا خدای ما خدایم گدای وطن را کن نصیب ما خدا جان دی ملکا مسافر و غریب و ما خدا جان دی ملکا مسافر و غریب و ما خدا جان بی یار و بی کس و قوم و غریب و ما خدا جان بی یار و بی کس و قوم و غریب و ما خدا جان شهنشاهی مد اینجا خدای ما خدایم گدای وطن را کن نصیب ما خدا جان مسلمانم بچه دل ما کشاله مسلمانم بچه دل ما کشاله نمیدانم وطنم چی اواله نمیدانم وطنم کجایی و کجایی درختی بید قشلاقم کجایی و کجایی مسلمانا بچه دل ما کشایی